Welcome to Dreamveil Stories, a quiet place where time slows down, where the night listens, and every breath is a soft doorway into calm. Tonight we invite you to drift beside the gentle hum of candlelight, to rest within the warmth of imagination, and to let your heart wander through a world where dreams and history intertwine. So, my dear listener, find a comfortable place to rest. Let your hands relax, your eyelids grow heavy, and your breathing settle into a slow, peaceful rhythm. Breathe in deeply. Hold it just for a moment, and now let it go. Feel the air leave you like a soft sigh across the surface of still water. The day is gone, the world is hushed, and you are safe here, surrounded by the hush of story and sleep. You might imagine a candle glowing somewhere close, its flame gentle and steady, casting golden ripples across stone and wood. Maybe you hear the faint crackle of a hearth, or the distant flutter of night wind against an old window pane. Let that warmth settle into you. Let it soften your thoughts. And as you rest within this circle of quiet, our story tonight begins. Our story sets sail in a time long ago, in a small stone workshop tucked beneath the crest of a hill. Outside, the medieval world stirs faintly, a village sleeping, the echo of hooves fading on the distant road, a windmill turning lazily against a pale moon. Inside that workshop, everything is soft and slow. The light of the fire ripples across shelves stacked with glass vials, brass instruments, and pages marked with curling ink. Every surface gleams with the careful patience of one who has spent a lifetime seeking understanding. And there, seated before the hearth, is an alchemist, an old man with eyes as clear as melted amber. His hair, silvered and soft, falls to his shoulders. In one hand he holds a feather quill, and in the other, an hourglass of slender shape, filled with golden sand that glows as though kissed by the sun itself. The hourglass hums faintly, not with sound, but with presence. Each grain that falls carries a tiny spark of light, and the alchemist watches as they slip through the narrow throat of time. He does not hurry. He has never hurried, for he knows deeply, wordlessly, that time, like sand, moves most gracefully when left untouched. The air around him smells faintly of sage and honey. Dry bundles of herbs hang from the rafters, lavender, rosemary, marjoram, their shadows swaying gently in the candlelight. A pot of melted wax rests on the hearthstone, and every so often the alchemist stirs it with a slender stick, watching the surface shimmer like liquid gold. He murmurs softly to himself, half a prayer, half a lullaby of habit. In every grain of sand an angel breathes once, and dreams of eternity. It was said in his time that medieval alchemists believed sand held the size of the heavens, tiny remnants of stardust fallen to earth. When they built hourglasses, they believed they were not measuring hours, but the slow exhalation of the divine. The alchemist, whose name was Alaric, had built this hourglass with his own trembling hands. He had ground the glass himself, fired it under the full moon, and poured into it sand gathered from the banks of a river where monks once whispered their prayers. It was his finest work, and tonight He watched it for the 1,000th time. Outside his small window, snow began to drift. Not the harsh kind, but the soft, wandering flakes that float as if unsure where to land. They touched the window pane like whispers, each one melting into a circle of water that gleamed in the candlelight. Alaric smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. He had once been young a scholar who crossed mountains to learn from sages and monks. He had studied the stars when most men were asleep. He had listened to the sound of quills scratching parchment and believed knowledge could be turned into light. But now, in the winter of his years, it was the quiet that he studied. He had learned that silence has a texture, a weight, and that time itself, when observed with love, becomes gentle. So he sits. He listens to the faint drip of melting wax. He watches the sand fall, grain by grain, light by light. Somewhere in the shadows a small clock ticks. Its rhythm joins the slow fall of sand, the pop of the fire, the distant sigh of snow against stone. You can almost hear it, the room breathing. Each sound part of a greater harmony, a lullaby of patience. If you listen closely, you might hear the faint hum of glass. For within the hourglass time is not still, it hums softly, as though remembering every moment it has ever held. And Alaric the alchemist leans closer to that sound. He closes his eyes for a while and lets the glow of the fire play against his eyelids. When he speaks, his voice is slow and low. They said the breath of angels lives in sand, and that if you listen long enough you might hear them sigh. He smiles again, because perhaps, just perhaps, he has heard them. The golden sand continues to fall, each grain a heartbeat, each heartbeat a star. And as the last few flecks drift through the narrow throat, he exhales, and time exhales with him. The candle beside him flickers once, then steadies. The shadows fold closer, warm and deep, and the alchemist whispers, "Another hour, another dream." The fire crackles softly, each ember collapsing into the next, like a sigh folding into a deeper silence. Alaric watches it fade to a bed of slow-moving golds and oranges, the colors reflecting in his eyes. He leans back in his wooden chair, a chair that creaks softly, a familiar sound that seems to cradle him. The air is warm, fragrant with old parchment and melted wax. Above him the rafters whisper as the winter wind drifts through tiny gaps in the roof tiles. The breeze carries with it the faintest sound of distant bells, church bells perhaps, or maybe only memory. He has lived beside those bells for 50 years. Their tones have marked every dawn, every prayer, every hour that slid gently through his fingers. He smiles to himself. How strange, he thinks, that people fear the passing of time when time itself is so tender. If one listens, truly listens, it never rushes. It moves like breath, like the turning of the earth beneath soft soil. He turns to his desk, where a small book lies open. Its pages are thick, hand-pressed, their edges curled like autumn leaves. The ink is brown with age, each letter drawn carefully with the patience of a man who once thought knowledge could unlock eternity. On the first page, in a steady script, He has written a line from an ancient Hermetic text, Tempus est anima mundi. Time is the soul of the world. He traces the words with a fingertip. The parchment feels cool, smooth, almost alive. The world, he muses, has many souls. The rivers, the stars, the voices of forgotten scholars, but perhaps time is the gentlest of them all. Outside, the snow continues to fall. It gathers on the stone ledge of the window, turning the world into a pale hush. Even the night birds are still, as if listening, and the alchemist, old Alaric, feels the kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from fullness, a quiet so rich it hums softly in the chest. He rises slowly, his joints murmuring like ancient hinges, and walks to a shelf lined with glass jars. Each jar holds something different: crushed petals, ash, powdered shells, threads of copper, flakes of silver. He reaches for one filled with tiny fragments of mica, shining faintly, even in shadow. Holding it close to the fire, he whispers, "Stars caught in stone, echoes of the heavens." He sprinkles a few grains into the wax pot. They melt, shimmer, and scatter into tiny sparks that glow within the molten gold. For a moment it seems the very air is glittering, and Alaric smiles again, a small and secret smile, like a child remembering a dream. He turns then to his hourglass once more. The last grain has fallen. The upper chamber lies empty, a hollow sky waiting to be filled. He turns it over carefully, and the sand begins its slow descent again, whispering through the glass like soft rain on a chapel roof. As it falls, his mind drifts. He remembers a night long ago, the night he first created this hourglass. He had been much younger then, his hair dark as ink, his hands unsteady from excitement rather than age. He had worked for days without sleep, melting and shaping the glass, grinding the sand into perfect golden grains. He remembered walking to the river before dawn, his bare feet cold against the frost-covered stones, and dipping a brass bowl into the water as the first light touched the surface. The monks nearby were chanting, their voices echoing across the hills. He had whispered a prayer then, not for wealth, not for fame, but for the patience to understand time. And when he sealed the sand into the glass, a faint light had shimmered through it, a warmth that had never faded. Now, so many years later, he watches the same sand fall again, and it feels alive. Each grain seems to carry a memory, each tiny sparkle a whisper of something vast. He closes his eyes. The warmth of the fire touches his face. He breathes slowly, and the rhythm of his breath matches the rhythm of the falling sand. In and out. A grain falls. A breath flows. Time and breath become one. His mind drifts further, to the stories he once heard as a boy. Old travelers had spoken of hourglasses that did not measure hours, but dreams. They said each turn of the glass gathered the day's lost thoughts, the murmurs of those asleep, and let them drift downward into new beginnings. He wonders now, could that be true? Could the sand in his hourglass be made not of earth, but of memory? He watches it closely, and for a moment he thinks he sees faces in it, tiny, flickering shapes of people he once loved, friends long gone, teachers and wanderers, and ghosts of youth. He blinks. The shapes vanish, but the feeling remains, a gentle ache wrapped in peace. He whispers to the hourglass, "If you hold their dreams, keep them well." He sits back down, and the chair welcomes him with a soft groan of wood. Outside, the wind grows softer, as if the night itself is leaning close to listen. The sound of snow against the window becomes a rhythm, a sleepy lullaby of winter. Alaric reaches for a small cup of wine by his side. It is warm, spiced with cloves and cinnamon, a recipe he learned from a traveling merchant decades ago. He takes a slow sip, and the sweetness lingers on his tongue. He sets the cup down, closes his eyes once more, and lets his thoughts drift not forward, but backward, to the day the hourglass first turned, and time began whispering back. The hour grows late, though time seems to move differently here. It does not march forward, it drifts, like dust and candlelight. The fire, once bright and crackling, now glows in low embers, each pulse of red a heartbeat in the darkness. Alaric sits with his palms open, facing the warmth, and feels the faint shimmer of air between his fingers. He imagines it as energy, as memory, as breath, something the old philosophers might have called ether. It was said that in the Middle Ages, alchemists believed ether was the fifth element, the invisible thread binding all things together, air, fire, water, and earth joined by something unseen. He breathes in softly, and for a fleeting moment he thinks he can feel it, that subtle connection between himself and every living thing. The hourglass hums faintly, its sand falling slower now, each grain a golden sigh. From beyond the shuttered window, a faint rooster's call drifts up from the valley below. It is not yet dawn, but the sound touches the air like the first thought of morning. The world outside is covered in snow, the rooftops silver, the trees etched in frost like lacework against the indigo sky. Alaric stands, carefully steadying himself with one hand on his chair. He walks to the window and wipes a small circle clear with his sleeve. Through it, he can see the village sleeping, the baker's chimney smoking faintly, the watchtower's lantern flickering, and the chapel's steeple outlined against a moon so thin it could almost vanish into the clouds. He breathes on the glass, the fog spreads, then clears, and in that shifting haze he imagines he sees the past. A young boy running across the snow, clutching a bundle of herbs for the apothecary. A girl at the well, her hands red from the cold, smiling at the sight of him as he passes. He remembers her, Mariel, the miller's daughter, whose laughter once sounded like wind chimes in spring. For a heartbeat, he feels the warmth of that memory flicker inside him. Then gently it fades. He places his palm on the window pane and whispers, "The sand remembers." The candle beside the hourglass flutters, and for a moment the flame burns taller, as if time itself heard his voice. He turns back to his table. On the surface lies a collection of objects that would seem strange to most eyes. A vial of crushed pearl, a strip of linen wrapped in wax, and a single raven's feather, its tip dipped in shimmering silver ink. These were not trinkets. They were memories, each sealed in matter. For medieval alchemists believed that every material was a mirror of the soul. To them, a feather was not merely a feather, it was freedom made tangible, the echo of sky turned to form. Alaric picks up the feather, holds it between finger and thumb, and lets it sway gently in the air. To hold the essence of flight, he murmurs, is to understand hope. He dips it into the ink, watching as the silver glows faintly, and begins to write in his book once more. Each stroke of his quill makes a soft, rhythmic sound, a slow whisper of parchment accepting words. He writes not for others now, but for himself, to preserve the thoughts that come only in silence, to anchor them before they drift away like morning mist. The words he writes are simple. Time is not a river that carries us away. It is a tide that returns us to what we love. He pauses, reads the line back, and smiles faintly. The truth of it feels like warmth in his chest. He closes the book and rests his hand atop it. For a moment, the world is utterly still. Even the snow outside seems to have stopped falling. Then a sound. Soft, distant, but distinct. The faintest chime, as though glass has been touched by wind. He looks toward the hourglass. The golden sand still falls, but as he watches, he notices something unusual. A faint shimmer between the two chambers, like a veil of light rippling within. He leans closer. The hum grows stronger, vibrating through the wooden table, through his fingertips resting on the edge of the glass. For an instant, the room seems to fade. The walls, the shelves, the fire, all soften, dissolving into a golden haze. You can hear something, not a sound exactly, but the suggestion of voices, layered and soft, like 1,000 sighs breathed all at once. The air smells faintly of jasmine. The hourglass glows. Alaric closes his eyes, and in that glow he feels himself floating, weightless, calm, timeless. He realizes then what the ancients meant when they said that sand carried the breath of angels. For in this moment, as the golden grains drift down, he hears them. They are not speaking words, but they are saying everything. He opens his eyes again slowly. The glow fades, and the room returns. Fire, wood, stone, all steady and real. He exhales softly, a smile of quiet wonder resting on his lips. The sand continues to fall, and the hourglass hums no more. But the air still feels charged, as though a secret has just passed through. He whispers to the quiet, "I have heard you. Thank you." Then he leans back once more, his gaze drifting toward the rafters, where dried herbs sway in rhythm with his breath. The scent of rosemary fills the air. The fire gives one last pop, and time once again moves gently forward. And so the quiet deepened. The hour had passed unnoticed, as hours often do when peace lays its gentle hand upon the room. The alchemist sat very still, his eyes half closed, his mind wandering among thoughts that did not need answers. He had once chased answers furiously, hungrily. When he was young, he sought the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, the secrets whispered by the heavens into the ears of chosen minds. But tonight, in the waning hush of his later years, he found himself caring for none of that. Now he found more comfort in the faint fragrance of sage upon the air, the muted hiss of the candle's slow melt, the small sacred sound of sand falling in an endless lullaby of time. He leaned forward slightly and watched the golden grains shimmer within the hourglass. Each particle of sand seemed to catch its own glow, a flicker of reflected light that faded into shadow as it slipped away. And he wondered not as a scholar but as a dreamer whether the old belief might be true after all, that perhaps when sand falls, something beyond sight exhales, that every moment of stillness is a breath shared with something vast and kind. He whispered to himself, perhaps these grains are not measuring time at all, but listening to it. The words hung in the quiet, and the room felt almost alive, as if the walls themselves had paused to listen. Outside, the night wind stirred faintly against the shutters, a breeze so delicate it barely made a sound. But it carried with it scent of rain far away, and something older, the damp perfume of stone and soil that had known centuries of moonlight. The alchemist drew his cloak tighter around his shoulders. The fire in the hearth was low now, its glow soft and tender, the embers breathing a dim red like a creature half asleep. He took the iron poker and nudged one of the logs, and the ashes sighed, scattering a brief flurry of sparks that shimmered, then vanished like tiny stars returning home. He found it beautiful, that moment, the gentle death of fire, the quiet birth of light. All things, he thought, were like that. Every ending merely a transformation. Even the sand falling within his hourglass was not vanishing, but becoming part of something unseen, a rhythm, a harmony, a sigh that continued beyond his hearing. He reached out, almost without thinking, and turned the hourglass once more. The grains reversed, rising, then tumbling down again. The sound was soft as distant rain. He smiled faintly. From his desk he took a small vial and old glass bottle sealed with wax and bound in twine. The liquid inside shimmered faintly gold, as though it too held tiny sands within it. He had brewed it long ago, when he still believed he could capture the essence of dawn, distill it into a single drop of eternal light. But over the years he had come to see it differently. It was not a potion of power or eternity. It was instead a memory. The memory of a sunrise he once watched from a tower window the morning after a sleepless night of study. He remembered how the sun had spilled over the valley, painting rooftops with pale gold and turning the mist into ribbons of silk. He remembered how the bells in the far-off chapel had begun to ring, soft at first, then swelling with gentle joy. It had been that sunrise, not any formula or flame, that had first taught him what alchemy truly was. Not the changing of lead to gold, but the transformation of a moment into meaning. The ability to take something ordinary and see within it the sacred. He looked at the vial, then at the hourglass, then back to the flickering hearth, and with a sigh as soft as a prayer, he whispered, "Then let the night turn to dawn in its own way. Let the sands fall as they will." He placed the vial back on the shelf beside other bottles, some empty, some glowing faintly, some opaque with dust. Each one, he realized, held not failure, but fragments of a long, luminous journey. He closed his eyes, listening again. The sand whispered. The fire breathed. The wind sang faintly through the cracks of the window. He could feel sleep pressing gently at the edge of his thoughts, like a velvet curtain lowering slowly upon the stage of his mind. Before surrendering to it, he murmured one final reflection. If every grain is an angel's breath, then perhaps they are counting not the hours that pass, but the moments we truly feel alive. He let that thought linger as the sand continued its golden descent. And then, with the softest smile, the alchemist let his head rest against the back of the chair. The flicker of the candles began to dim. The night folded itself around him, and the world became a lullaby of falling sand and breathing stars. Outside, unseen but near, a single nightingale began to sing. Its notes rose like the hourglass turned upside, downlight ascending, shimmering, vanishing into the hush of the night. And time itself, kind and slow, seemed to bow its head and listen. The alchemist did not know how long he had drifted between waking and sleep. It was a place without edges, where thoughts became feathers and feathers became dreams. When his eyes opened again, the fire had dwindled to a soft orange hush, and the candles had wept themselves shorter. The air shimmered faintly with the scent of beeswax and myrrh. He sat still, his breath slow and even, feeling as though the room itself were breathing with him. The ticking rhythm of the hourglass, soft, steady, eternal, filled the silence like a lullaby from another realm. For a long moment he did not move. He simply watched. Then, as though summoned by memory rather than reason, he reached for an old parchment that lay folded at the corner of his desk. The edges were frayed. The ink faded to a deep sepia hue. He had written it decades ago, when his hands were young and eager, his heart full of wonder. On it was drawn the design for an instrument he had never built, an hourglass that ran both ways at once, a twin stream of sand rising and falling in perfect harmony, forever balanced. He remembered how he believed it could capture the essence of balance in the universe, the delicate exchange between creation and decay, between the inhale and exhale of time itself. Now, looking at it again, he smiled, not because he wished to build it, but because he understood it at last. The hourglass had always existed. It was life itself. Every joy that rose gave birth to sorrow that fell, and every sorrow, in turn, carried within it the seed of rising joy. He whispered, his voice as soft as the shifting sands, "Nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed." The room seemed to agree with him. A faint sound of flutter, gentle and light, came from the rafters above. He looked up and saw a small moth circling near the flame. Its wings shimmered silver, catching the faintest glimmers of candlelight as it moved. He watched the moth for a long time, mesmerized by its fragile grace. In medieval times, he recalled, some believed moths carried the souls of scholars who had died mid-discovery. their spirits drawn eternally toward the light of unfinished knowing. He had always found that thought haunting and strangely comforting. Do you still seek what you once sought? He murmured to the moth, smiling faintly. The moth dipped once, almost like a nod, before spiraling upward again, gentle, glowing, alive. The alchemist reached out a hand, as if to feel the air it stirred. The gesture was slow, tender. He felt the faint brush of its movement, a whisper against his fingertips, and something deep within him softened, the way earth softens after a quiet rain. He leaned back once more, eyes half closed. His mind wandered through the corridors of memory back to the echoing halls of the old university, where he had studied under candlelight until dawn. He remembered the sound of quills scratching upon parchment, the smell of ink and wax, the rustle of heavy robes. He remembered the echo of the great bell that marked each hour, its resonance rolling like thunder soft by centuries. And he remembered his teacher, a patient, gray-haired woman who had once told him, "Alchemy is not about transmuting metal, child. It's about transmuting yourself." He hadn't understood her then. He thought she meant discipline, intellect, the perfection of craft. But tonight, in the quiet, he understood what she had truly meant. To live gently, to notice deeply, to let wonder refine the soul until it gleamed like polished gold. That was the truest alchemy. He smiled again, a serene, private smile. The kind that comes when they've been chasing answers your whole life and finally realize that stillness was the answer all along. He lifted his gaze once more to the hourglass. The sand had nearly emptied again, but it no longer filled him with the ache of time passing. Instead, it soothed him. The slow fall of each grain was like a heartbeat, steady, patient, eternal. The fire gave a soft sigh, as though to echo his own. The last flame flickered and leaned toward the wick, curling faintly before it settled into a single glowing ember. In that dim, golden hush, the alchemist whispered, "When the last grain falls, perhaps I too will turn." He did not mean death exactly, nor sleep, nor rebirth. He meant something more subtle, more sacred, a turning within the soul, like the gentle shift of sand when the glass is reversed. The moth landed upon the rim of the hourglass, still and shining. Its wings opened once, twice. Then it rested, perfectly calm, as if it too were listening. He closed his eyes once again, and in the hush that followed, time itself seemed to slow until it was no longer time at all, just being, pure and peaceful. Outside, the sky was rippling with the pale shimmer of approaching dawn. The first birds were beginning to stir, their distant songs floating like threads of silk upon the air. The alchemist did not move to see them. He didn't need to. He could feel the light coming. He could feel it in his pulse, in the warmth gathering at the edge of the world, in the golden hush of falling sand. And somewhere, in that space between heartbeat and breath, he smiled once more and whispered, "Good night," or "Good morning." It is all one. The wind outside sighed gently in reply, and the last grain of sand slipped softly into the base of the hourglass, quiet as sleep itself. The first light of dawn crept like a timid traveler across the wooden floorboards of the alchemist's chamber. It touched the corners, first the shelves of glass bottles, the brass instruments, the open scrolls still breathing faintly of ink, and then climbed toward the center of the room, where the hourglass rested. The grains within it glowed softly in the new light, turning from gold to pale rose. For a moment it seemed as though the sand itself were waking, stretching its glimmering limbs after a long night's sleep. The alchemist stirred. He did not open his eyes immediately, but he smiled, faintly aware that dawn had come to meet him. He could feel its warmth painting his face, like a gentle hand resting upon his cheek. Outside, a rooster crowed in the distance. The sound came muffled through the stone walls, low, rhythmic, unhurried. The kind of morning call that didn't demand, but simply invited the world to awaken. He took a long, slow breath. The air had changed. The scent of night herbs had faded, replaced by the faint perfume of morning dew and fresh straw from the nearby fields. A new day had arrived quietly, gracefully, like a silken veil lifted by invisible hands. When he finally opened his eyes, he found that the moth from the night before was still there, resting upon the hourglass. Its wings shimmered faintly, dusted with the light of dawn. He admired its stillness, its quiet courage to exist between night and day, neither lost nor found, simply being. "Good morning, little keeper of the flame," he whispered, voice still wrapped in sleep. The moth stirred, and for an instant he could have sworn that the air around it shimmered brighter, as though it understood. He rose slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile calm that filled the room. His bones creaked softly, like old wood easing in the warmth. He wrapped his robe tighter, a faded garment once rich with color, now as pale as moonlight. He walked to the window and unlatched it. The shutters swung open with a sigh, and a cool breath of morning air drifted inside. It carried with it the sounds of the waking village below, the faint clatter of a cart, the bark of a dog, the laughter of a child chasing a stray goose through the mud. Life was stirring, gently and honestly, just as it had for centuries. He rested his elbows on the windowsill, gazing out over the rooftops of stone and slate. Chimneys were beginning to smoke. Bakeries were already alive with the scent of bread, and somewhere beyond the walls he could hear the soft ringing of the chapel bell, the first peal of prime, welcoming the morning prayers. He listened. The bell's echo mingled with the birdsong, weaving a tapestry of sound that felt almost like the heartbeat of the world. He thought of how, in the medieval days of his youth, monks would measure time by prayer instead of by hours, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. Each bell a breath, each prayer a grain of sand in the divine hourglass. And he wondered whether perhaps the angels still listened, keeping time not in minutes or moments, but in the spaces between them. He turned back toward his desk. The room glowed softly now, warm light, upon wood, upon glass, upon parchment. The hourglass looked different by day. It no longer whispered of mystery or eternity, but of gentle presence, the humble beauty of now. He picked it up carefully, feeling the cool glass between his palms. It felt alive, somehow warm at the center, as though it remembered the night's candlelight. He tipped it once, letting the sands begin their descent anew. This time the grains sparkled in the daylight, each one a sunbeam falling, one by one, in quiet rhythm. He leaned closer, watching, and his voice came as barely a murmur. The alchemy of time is not in changing it, but in noticing how it changes us. He placed the hourglass back down, its whispering hush filling the silence once more. For a moment he simply stood there, eyes half closed, letting the rhythm of falling sand guide his breath. In and out, in and out. Each inhale like the rise of dawn, each exhale like the fall of dusk. He thought of all the hours he had spent chasing eternal things, all the nights lost to study, all the candles burned to stubs, all the words written and rewritten, seeking answers that perhaps were never meant to be found. Now, in the soft glow of this morning, he realized that eternity had always been here, woven into the breath of each passing moment. He smiled, a tear gathering quietly at the corner of his eye, not from sadness, but from recognition. Outside, a pair of doves landed on the window ledge, cooing softly. They nestled together, feathers brushing, eyes bright in the pale light. He whispered almost to himself, "Their love is also an alchemy, simple, silent, infinite." A faint chime rang from one of his old brass instruments as the sunlight touched it. It was the softest sound, yet it carried through the room like a blessing. The alchemist took a step back, breathed deeply, and let his gaze fall once more upon his workshop. The herbs hanging in bunches, the glass bottles glowing faintly in the sun, the books lined like silent companions on the shelf. Each thing, ordinary and extraordinary, told the story of his life. A life measured not by gold nor glory, but by moments such as these, small, shimmering, and utterly human. He whispered a simple thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to everything at once. And as he spoke, the grains of sand continued to fall soft, steady, golden, marking not the passing of time, but the stillness within it. Outside, the light grew warmer. The day had begun. The morning drifted on, unhurried and kind. Light moved across the alchemist's chamber in a slow dance, first touching the shelves, then the floor, and finally the hourglass, where each grain of sand shimmered like a captured sunbeam. Outside, the sound of distant bells gave rhythm to the day, each tone soft enough to melt into the hush of bird song and breeze. The alchemist turned toward his small hearth and rekindled the embers. The faint scent of ash and pine wood rose again, warm and comforting, like an old friend's embrace. As the fire grew, it began to hum a tender crackle that blended with the sigh of the wind outside. He sat once more at his desk, his movements gentle, unhurried. A quill lay beside an open notebook, its pages filled with fragments of thought, half-written theories, curious questions, little sketches of stars and hourglasses, and the moon's changing face. He dipped the quill into the ink, and as he wrote, his voice whispered softly in the quiet room, Alchemy begins not in fire, but in stillness, not in the furnace, but in the heart. The quill moved in slow, looping strokes. The ink gleamed wet for a moment, then dried into a deep brown, soft, organic, like earth after rain. He found himself writing not formulas or incantations, but reflections, gentle musings that asked no answers. Perhaps, he wrote, the true elixir of life is patience. He smiled faintly, his eyes tracing the words as if they were threads of light spun upon parchment. The smile deepened as he added another thought. And perhaps immortality is not to live forever, but to live fully so deeply in the moment that time forgets your name. He paused, feeling the weight and ease of that truth settle in his chest. Outside, a breeze wandered through the open window, stirring the edges of the parchment. The light flickered on the golden sand once more. He looked up and whispered, "Time is a river, yet we are the quiet pools where it stops to rest." And in that whisper, something inside him softened further, a surrender that was not defeat, but acceptance. He set the quill down and turned to the small wooden chest at the foot of his workbench. Inside were things gathered across a lifetime: an old astrolabe, a broken compass, tiny vials filled with glimmering dust, and a stone the color of midnight rain. Each object was a memory, a chapter in the slow unfolding of his days. He lifted the midnight stone first. It was cool and heavy in his hand, and as the sunlight touched it, faint silver veins flickered across its surface. He remembered where he had found it decades ago, in the ruins of an ancient abbey. The monks there had once believed that stones could dream, and that each one held the memory of the earth from which it was born. He had laughed at the idea then, but now he wasn't so sure. He could almost feel the dream within it, a deep, patient hum, like the low vibration of the world's oldest lullaby. He set it down carefully, then picked up a small bronze disc etched with circles and strange markings. It was an unfinished project, a celestial map that he had meant to complete long ago. The constellations had faded from his memory now, their names replaced by feelings rather than facts. He traced one of the circles with his fingertip and murmured, "I used to think the stars were secrets waiting to be solved, but they were songs all along." He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He could almost hear them, the stars of his youth, still singing, their voices distant and sweet. Their music was not made of sound, but of silence, the kind of silence that fills the soul, not empties it. He let that silence pour through him, warm and slow, until the boundary between himself and the world began to blur. His breath grew deeper. The room seemed to breathe with him again. The flickering flame, the shifting air, the whispering sand. Each thing alive, each thing resting, all in harmony. When he opened his eyes again, a soft shimmer lingered at the edge of his vision, tiny motes of dust glowing like golden dust fairies in the sunlight. They drifted lazily through the air, circling the hourglass, then vanishing into the bright hush above. He thought of how medieval scholars once believed that dust was not waste or decay, but fragments of stars fallen to earth. He liked that idea. that even the smallest speck carried the memory of light. He whispered, his tone no louder than the wind, "Then let me too become dust one day, golden and quiet and full of light." The moth, still resting near the hourglass, stirred its wings faintly, as though to answer him. He smiled. Yes, just so. He felt no fear in that thought-only peace. To return to the elements, to blend with the air, to whisper forever in the turning of time, it seemed not an ending, but a continuation. An alchemist's truest transformation. He rose and poured himself a cup of warm herbal infusion from a pot he had left steeping overnight. The scent was gentle lavender, chamomile, and a hint of rosemary. He held it close, letting the steam rise against his face, feeling it kiss his skin. As he sipped, the taste was soft and grounding, like rainwater filtered through memory. He exhaled slowly, and the world seemed to settle even further into its perfect rhythm. The hourglass continued its golden descent. The fire murmured in the hearth, and the alchemist, old and content, whispered once more into the quiet air, "All things fall, and all things rise again." He lifted the cup in a small, silent toast to the morning, to the moth, to the turning sands, and to the soft, eternal dance between what was, what is, and what will be. Then he closed his eyes again and listened. As twilight settled over the village, a gentle wind stirred the willows by the riverbank, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the promise of something sacred. From every cottage window, warm light spilled out, soft, flickering, golden, while children gathered with small lanterns of oiled paper, their hands trembling with anticipation. It was the festival of remembrance, a night when the living whispered their love to the stars. Aurelia, with her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, walked the winding road leading toward the marshes, where hundreds of lanterns would soon drift upon the black water. Her lantern was shaped like a crescent moon, a gift from the old craftsman who raised her after her parents were gone. Inside it a candle burned with a strangely gentle flame, blue at its heart and steady as breath. The villagers sang low, wistful hymns as they arrived at the water's edge. The surface gleamed like liquid obsidian, reflecting both the heavens above and the trembling lanterns waiting to be released. When the first one was set upon the water, a hush fell. The sound of its soft glide, the rippling wake it left, felt like a sigh from the past itself. Aurelia knelt at the shore, her fingers brushing the cool surface. "To those who walked before me," she whispered, "and to the dreams they never saw to their end, I carry them still." Her words floated away, mingling with the gentle crackle of candles and the sigh of the reeds. Then, with the lightest push, she sent her lantern drifting out among the others. Each light upon the water became a star mirrored from above, hundreds of small souls sailing together across the night. The air shimmered with the faint glow of remembrance, and in that quiet beauty no one spoke. The silence was not empty but full of echoes, of unspoken thanks, of the pulse of shared memory. As Aurelia gazed across the drifting field of fire, something stirred deep in her, a sense that these lights were not merely symbols, but bridges. She thought of her mother's hands braiding her hair, her father's laughter when he lifted her to see the first snow of winter. The details had faded, but the feeling remained. The warmth, the belonging, the love that did not need to be remembered to still exist. A sudden shimmer caught her eye, a single lantern glowing brighter than all the rest. Its flame pulsed with rhythm, like a heartbeat, then began to move upstream, against the current. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd, but Aurelia only smiled faintly, as though recognizing an old friend. Without hesitation, she stepped into the shallow water, her dress darkening in the moonlight. The lantern drifted toward her, unbothered by the flow. She reached out, and the light hovered before her, blue and gold, soft as breath, yet humming with something ancient. In its glow she saw 1,000 faces, those who had loved and those who had been lost. For a single trembling moment she felt their presence encircle her like the hush before dawn. Then, as if satisfied, the light dimmed to the size of a firefly and floated back downstream, joining the others once more. When Aurelia emerged from the water, the villagers watched her in awe. Her hair shimmered faintly with droplets of light, and her eyes reflected something infinite, not grief but peace. She turned to them, voice low and clear. "Memory is not what fades," she said softly. "It is what changes shape from a touch to a scent, to a flame that will never truly go out." A soft murmur spread through the crowd, like leaves stirred by the gentlest wind. Some wept quietly, others smiled through tears, but all felt lighter, as though the night itself had lifted part of their sorrow away. As the final lanterns drifted beyond sight, the moon rose higher, silvering the marsh and the mist that lingered above it. The village slept beneath that ancient, forgiving light, and the wind carried the scent of wax and wildflowers across the fields. Aurelia remained by the river until the last flicker faded beyond the reeds. When she finally turned to go, she felt the world exhale, as though it, too, had found its peace. And in that stillness, far beyond the lanterns, something unseen whispered her name, not as farewell, but as promise. The night after the festival, sleep did not find Aurelia easily. Though her body ached from standing long by the marsh, her mind drifted restlessly, carried by half-remembered voices and the lingering shimmer of candlelight. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the river of lanterns and that one bright flame moving against the current, calling to her. The sound of it, faint and distant, came again now. Not the lapping of water, but a melody, a wordless tune woven with sorrow and serenity, like a lullaby hummed by the stars themselves. It came through her window from the dark beyond the fields, threading through the whisper of pine branches. Drawn by a quiet certainty, Aurelia rose from her bed, wrapped herself in her shawl, and stepped out into the cool night. Mist gathered around her ankles as she crossed the meadow. The moon hung low, pale and full, lighting her path with silver. Every sound seemed magnified, the soft crunch of frost beneath her boots, the sigh of the wind through tall grass, the distant hoot of an owl. The melody deepened as she reached the edge of the forest. Between the pines, faint motes of light flickered like tiny spirits, not bright enough to see clearly, but enough to guide her. She followed them in silence. The deeper she went, the thicker the scent of moss and rain became, until it felt as though the forest was breathing slowly, rhythmically, alive in its own timeless slumber. Then, through the trees, she saw a clearing bathed in moonlight. At its center stood an enormous pine, older than any she'd ever seen. Its trunk was gnarled and broad, its roots like sleeping serpents that curled around a pool of still water. The melody came from there, from the water itself. Aurelia stepped closer, her breath visible in the chill. The pool reflected not her own face, but the moon above, yet the reflection was not perfect. In the mirrored world below, the moon rippled like a heartbeat, and the shadows of the trees seemed to move even when the air was still. As she leaned nearer, she saw faint images drifting across the water, the same lanterns from the festival, glowing gently beneath the surface, as though sailing on a river of memory beneath the earth. The song grew louder now, not in her ears but in her chest. It was a song of remembering, of love refusing to be lost. She whispered into the water, "Who sings?" The reflection shimmered. For a moment she thought she saw a woman's face within the moonlight, pale, serene, her hair like woven starlight. Her voice came soft as wind through feathers. "We are those who remain where memory sleeps. You lit our way. Now follow the echo of your own heart." Aurelia felt tears gather unbidden. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How can I follow what I cannot see?" The water rippled again, and a single pine needle floated to its surface, glowing faintly with blue fire. It drifted toward her hand, and as she touched it, warmth spread through her palm, gentle, pulsing warmth like a heartbeat not her own. In that instant she saw flashes, her village from long ago, her parents' laughter, her childhood home bathed in early morning light. But woven through those memories was something deeper, something older, images of the same marsh and the same river, the same moon reflected in water centuries before she was born. The world swayed around her, yet she did not fall. She realized then that the lanterns, the song, and even the strange flame she had seen the night before were all threads of one great tapestry, a story that belonged not just to her, but to every soul who had ever loved, lost, and dared to remember. When she opened her eyes again, the glowing pine needle had dimmed, leaving only its warmth behind. The forest was utterly still, but the peace within her felt alive, vast as the sky, quiet as snowfall. Aurelia knelt beside the ancient tree and whispered her thanks. Then she turned back toward home, guided by moonlight that seemed a little brighter than before. The melody did not follow her this time. Instead, it stayed behind, humming softly from within the earth, like a heart continuing to beat after the dreamer has woken. By the time she reached the edge of the village, dawn was breaking, a pale gold glow spilling gently over rooftops and fields. She paused, breathing in the scent of dew and wild mint, and for the first time in many years she felt whole. The river of lanterns had vanished, yet in her heart they still glowed, each one a small sun, lighting the unseen paths of her soul. And so, with the morning light brushing her hair, Aurelia whispered, "Thank you, not to the forest nor the sky, but to the silence that had taught her to listen." When Aurelia awoke, dawn had fully stretched across the village. Soft sunlight filtered through her window in bands of gold, falling gently upon her small table, her wooden chest, and the dried bundles of herbs hanging by the door. For a moment she wondered if her walk into the forest had been a dream, so delicate, so otherworldly, that it almost seemed too light to be real. Then she noticed it. Resting on the linen beside her hand was something that had not been there before. A pendant, small, round, and made of some silvery metal she could not name. At its center was a droplet of glass or crystal that shimmered faintly, and within that shimmer glowed a soft pulse of pale blue, the very hue of the pine needle's light. Aurelia sat up slowly, her breath catching in a hush of awe. She traced her fingertip over its surface. It was warm, not the warmth of sunlight, but the warmth of something alive, something that seemed to hum gently beneath her skin. Outside, the village stirred to life. The clatter of buckets from the well, the distant bleating of goats, the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels on stone. The ordinary world. And yet, she could not shake the sense that something had changed, not out there, but within her. She rose, wrapped her shawl tightly, and carried the pendant to her work table, where a few scattered pages of parchment lay waiting. By habit, she lit a beeswax candle and set a kettle to boil for morning tea. The scent of mint and sage soon filled the air, blending with the faint tang of the metal pendant, which smelled of rain on stone. When the alchemist entered, for by now Aurelia had begun to think of the old man, not as a separate figure of legend, but as a quiet companion whose essence lingered in her home, she almost did not notice him at first. His presence was soft, not a shadow nor a ghost, but a sense of someone standing just beyond her shoulder, calm and patient. "You followed the song," he said, his voice like the sound of turning pages. Aurelia didn't startle. She only nodded. "It led me to a pool in the woods," she whispered. "There was light." "And memory?" "And this." She lifted the pendant in her palm, letting its glow dance on the candle's flame. "It feels like time made into something you can hold." The alchemist smiled faintly. "Perhaps it is. In the old texts, they wrote of such things, not of gold or elixir, but of time distilled into stillness. They believed that every soul leaves behind a trace, like fine dust of light, and that if gathered with enough care, those traces could be shaped." He paused, and his tone grew quieter, almost reverent. "We once called it the breath of the hourglass." The marsh sighed in reply, and somewhere far off, a church bell tolled the hour, not as a reminder of the day's end, but as an echo of infinite beginnings. Aurelia closed her eyes, and the pulse of the pendant matched the steady rhythm of her heart. She drifted, not into sleep exactly, but into a space between breaths, where everything was both still and alive. The dream came softly, as all important dreams do, not with thunder or flashes, but with a slow unfurling, like mist rolling over the hills. Aurelia felt herself floating in the space between worlds, where light had no edge and sound moved like a sigh through air thick with gold dust. It was not her world, and yet it felt familiar, as if she had stepped into a memory that had always been waiting for her to arrive. Before her stood a workshop, ancient, candlelit, filled with the fragrance of oil, beeswax, and parchment. Shelves bowed under the weight of glass flasks, copper retorts, and scrolls tied with faded ribbons. There was music in the air, too, not played by instruments, but by the slow ticking of many hourglasses lined along the wall, each one glowing faintly with its own inner light. And there he was, the alchemist, younger than she had ever imagined. His hair, still black, fell across his brow as he leaned over his workbench. His hands, though steady, trembled with reverence as he turned a newly forged hourglass between his fingers. Its frame was wrought from silver and oak, its sand pale as moonlight. Each grain shimmered faintly, as if infused with breath itself. Aurelia could feel it, not as time, but as essence, as presence. The young alchemist whispered to himself as he turned it over. Not the passing of time, but its remembering. Not the measure of life, but its reflection. He smiled faintly, lost in thought, and then dipped a quill into ink. The parchment beside him bore the title De Spiritu Arenae, of the spirit of sand. Aurelia stepped closer, unseen but sensing everything. His mind, she realized, was not driven by ambition or gold, but by tenderness, a quiet longing to preserve the moments that slipped too easily away. She watched him trace a small rune upon the wooden frame, a simple spiral, symbol of continuity. As he carved it, he whispered words not from science but from prayer. May every breath be counted with kindness. May every silence remember its music. Then he took a small vial from the shelf, filled with something luminous, fluid, almost alive. As he uncorked it, the scent of wild honey and rain filled the air. The breath of angels, he murmured, caught in dew. He poured a single drop into the hourglass. The sand glowed brighter. The ticking in the room slowed, then stopped altogether. Aurelia's heart fluttered. She looked around. The candles had stilled their flames. Even the air hung motionless. The young alchemist stood frozen in wonder, his hand hovering just above the hourglass. Then the voice came, soft, feminine, echoing through the golden stillness. You have touched what was not meant to be touched, yet you do not seek to own it. The alchemist bowed his head. I seek only to listen, he whispered. If sand can hold a memory, then perhaps silence can hold a soul. The voice replied, kind and melodic. Then you may keep it. But remember, every grain holds a breath, and every breath carries longing. You must release what you collect. The glow around the hourglass softened. The air began to move again, candles flickering to life as if the world had just exhaled. Aurelia could see tears in the young man's eyes as he whispered, Then I will give it back when the time is right. The voice faded. But the hourglass, his creation, remained radiant, humming softly with the same resonance Aurelia had heard in the forest. It was the very first breath of the hourglass. The dream shifted. The workshop aged around her, dust gathering, parchment yellowing, shelves bowing deeper. She saw the alchemist grow older, slower, his once bright eyes dimmed, though never from sorrow, only from too much wonder. Each passing year he would tip the hourglass and whisper a name into it. A friend, a lover, a moment of laughter, a day of rain. And each time the glow within deepened. It became not a vessel of power, but of tenderness, an archive of everything too precious to be forgotten. Then one evening, as twilight poured through the shutters, the alchemist sat quietly before the hourglass and placed his hands upon it. If time is a breath, he said softly, then perhaps love is the one who exhales. He smiled, turned the glass one final time, and closed his eyes. The grains fell slower now, each one a shimmer of memory, until at last they stopped. The glow did not fade. It rose, drifting upward, carrying the softest echo of laughter and gratitude. The workshop filled with that light until all was peace. Aurelia stood alone now, surrounded by the shimmer of suspended sand. The young alchemist's workbench was empty save for the hourglass, resting silently, waiting. And in that stillness she heard his voice again, older now, the same one she'd come to know in her waking life. Do you see, Aurelia? Every moment, no matter how small, holds eternity within it. What you call time is only light learning how to fall. The glow around her brightened until it became pure white, soft as silk. And as it faded, she found herself once again in her room, morning sunlight spilling across the floorboards, her pendant gleaming quietly beside her hand. Its light pulsed once, slow, deliberate, like a sigh of remembrance. Morning drifted through Aurelia's cottage like silk. The light was soft, filtered through linen curtains, and the air carried the faint perfume of chamomile and dust. She sat beside her work table, hands folded, eyes half dreaming. Before her the pendant glimmered faintly, no longer just a charm, but a small echo of everything she had seen in her dream. She could still feel the weight of that vision, the young alchemist's devotion, the sacred stillness of the hourglass, the shimmering breath that was not quite light, not quite time. It left her chest heavy with wonder. Perhaps it's my turn, she whispered to the quiet. The pendant pulsed once as though in agreement. Aurelia began to gather her tools, a wooden bowl for sand, a small silver funnel, 2 pieces of blown glass she had once kept from a merchant's traveling cart, and a square of linen to polish them clean. As she arranged everything neatly upon the table, a calm came over her. Not excitement, not fear, but the calm of someone stepping into a rhythm older than thought. The alchemist's voice came faintly from the stillness, like an echo that breathed. Do not build it to measure. Build it to remember. She nodded softly, closing her eyes for a moment. In her mind she pictured the forest pool, the way the moonlight had shimmered on its surface. The blue glow within the pendant seemed to brighten in answer. When she opened it, the tiniest wisp of luminous dust escaped, spiraling through the air like a sigh before settling in the bowl before her. The dust shimmered, and slowly, reverently, she began to pour sand into it. The grains sparkled faintly, humming at the edge of hearing. Aurelia worked in silence, mindful of each movement. She recalled what she had once read in a crumbling old book from the Abbey, that medieval artisans often spoke to their craft as though it could listen, that breath guided creation more surely than the hand. So she spoke softly to the forming hourglass, as though to a child. This is for the moments that vanish too soon, for laughter that fades and kindness that lingers unseen. As she worked, the scent of warm beeswax filled the air from the candle beside her, burning slow and steady. The flame danced gently, casting soft ripples of light across the glass she polished. Outside, the wind carried the faint toll of the village bell. Time moved, yet within her cottage, everything felt suspended. When the two halves of glass were finally sealed, Aurelia held the hourglass up to the light. The sand within glowed faintly, pale gold tinged with silver. It wasn't perfect. The frame was slightly uneven. The glass bore tiny bubbles, yet it felt alive, complete in its own humble way. As she turned it over, the first grains began to fall, and in that falling she heard whispers, faint, tender whispers, not voices exactly, but the memory of them, a child's laughter in a courtyard, the hush of her mother's song, the quiet sigh of wind through autumn leaves. Each grain that fell released something, some half-forgotten sweetness, freed into the air like invisible music. Aurelia smiled through her tears. "You're beautiful," she whispered to the hourglass. "Not because you last, but because you let go." The alchemist's voice came once more, soft as drifting snow. "Now you understand. The secret was never in holding time, but in releasing it." Aurelia nodded. "Then what is it for?" "For listening," came the reply. "Every time you turn the glass, the world listens with you. Time itself leans closer, curious, patient. It remembers you." The candle beside her flickered, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw the faint outline of his face reflected in the hourglass, serene, luminous, smiling. Aurelia placed the finished hourglass upon her windowsill, where sunlight met shadow. Its glow intertwined with the day, neither brighter nor dimmer than before, but harmonized, like two breaths meeting in the same rhythm. Later, when evening descended, she sat before it again, her teacup steaming gently in her hands. The marsh beyond her home shimmered faintly beneath the twilight sky. She turned the glass once more, and as the sand began to fall, the world seemed to slow. Not stop, not freeze, but listen. She could hear the smallest things, the rustle of reeds, the wings of an insect, the faint creak of the wood beneath her feet. Every sound stretched, softened, deepened. And in that listening, Aurelia felt herself expand, her thoughts becoming slower, her breath quieter. She was no longer separate from the ticking of time, but part of its steady pulse. It was then that she truly understood what the alchemist had discovered centuries before, that peace did not come from escaping time, but from becoming gentle within it. The last of the sand fell, and the cottage seemed to sigh, a collective exhale of wood, wind, and memory. The fire dimmed, and her eyes grew heavy. She leaned her head upon her arm and whispered, if every grain holds a breath, then may this one be mine. The world hushed. The glow of the pendant and the hourglass merged into one soft light, the color of sleep, of kindness, of unspoken gratitude. And Aurelia drifted into dreams again, her heart calm as the still sands she had shaped with her own hands. The night deepened, and the harbor lights flickered out one by one, leaving only the moonglow resting upon the still waters. The minstrel sat by the tide, his lute beside him, and let the hush of the world fill his lungs. Above, the moon was full its light, soft, milky, forgiving. He thought of every bread he had ever baked in that celestial kitchen of dreams. Each one, he realized, had carried a note of longing, not just flavor, but song. And now he began to understand. The bread had always been the vessel of the moon as forgotten ballad. A lullaby that time had lost. He plucked a single note upon the lute. It trembled through the air, then scattered into the water like petals of silver sound. A soft wind rose, curling around him like the breath of an old friend. From the horizon, the reflection of the moon quivered, as though something stirred behind it. Then he saw her. The moon herself rose from her mirrored reflection, not in body, but in shimmering silhouette, woven from strands of light, her eyes tender as the last sigh before dawn. She walked upon the water, each step forming ripples that sang faintly, notes of a melody older than humanity's first heartbeat. "Minstrel," she whispered, her voice both everywhere and within him, "do you still bake for the lost?" "I bake," he murmured, bowing his head, "for all who hunger for warmth, for meaning, for remembrance." She smiled, her expression infinite and kind. "Then you are ready." Her silver hands reached toward him, and with a breath as soft as starlight she placed within his palms a single pearl, small as a tear and glowing faintly blue. "This," she said, "is the last crumb of my song. It fell from my lips the night I forgot how to dream. You have baked its echoes into your bread for centuries without knowing. Now it is time to let the world hear it again." He held the pearl, feeling it pulse alive, rhythmic, matching the heartbeat of the tide. The minstrel's eyes filled with tears, for he understood the enormity of her gift. The pearl was not treasure, it was memory. The world's first lullaby, the one that had lulled creation into rest. "Will I know what to do with it?" he asked. "You already do," she replied, her form beginning to fade into the mist. "When the song is sung, the bread will rise once more, not in your oven, but in every soul that dares to dream kindly." And then she was gone. Only her reflection remained, quivering softly on the black sea, until even that was swallowed by the slow turning of clouds. The minstrel sat for a long while. Then, with trembling fingers, he pressed the pearl to his heart. It dissolved not into dust, but into warmth, spreading through him like dawn through fog. He smiled. For the first time he understood that the bread had never been mere sustenance. It had been music baked into matter, a hymn to gentleness, kneaded by hope and baked by moonlight. He lifted his lute again and began to play. The melody that came forth was unlike any he had ever known, soft as candle breath, deep as midnight tide, fragile as the silence before sleep. It was the moon's forgotten ballad, reborn in his mortal hands, and as he played, something miraculous happened. The town above, those weary cottages and quiet streets, began to shimmer faintly in silver. Windows flickered to life, though no one had lit a lamp. The sound of his music drifted up the hillside, rushing through dreams like a comforting whisper. Children smiled in their sleep. Lovers' hands found each other. Old souls stirred and sighed as memories of forgotten kindness returned. Even the sea itself seemed to listen, calmer than it had been in years. When the last note faded, the minstrel sat quietly, eyes closed. The moon hid behind clouds, but her warmth remained woven into every wave, every breath, every crumb of silence. He whispered softly to the night, "Thank you for letting me remember." And from somewhere deep beneath the tide, a faint reply came like a sigh of gratitude carried by the sea. "Thank you for baking my song." The wind settled. The world slept easier, and the minstrel, at last, felt full not of bread, but of peace. By dawn, the minstrel's cottage on the hill seemed touched by something invisible, yet radiant. The roof tiles shimmered faintly, as though brushed with frostlight, and the window panes reflected the sky's softest hues, rose, lavender, pearl. Inside, the air was filled with the faint aroma of warm dough and quiet song. The minstrel awoke to that scent, half believing it was another dream. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the small oven glowing on its own, no fire within it, yet radiating the same warmth that had filled his chest when the moon gave him her pearl. He sat up slowly, his joints creaking like old floorboards. "So," he murmured, smiling faintly, "the song bakes itself now." Upon the wooden table sat a single loaf round, humble and glistening faintly with dew, as though the morning had kissed it. He could hear, if he listened closely, a hum coming from it, not words, but tones of deep peace. He broke it in half, and a soft silver light poured out, curling around his hands like breath. It wasn't heat, it was memory, rising like the scent of old summers and lullabies sung long ago. He took a piece and tasted it. It was unlike any flavor he had ever known. It didn't remind him of wheat or honey or spice. It reminded him of stillness, of the quiet that lives between raindrops, of the hush before the first note of a song. He closed his eyes, letting it fill him, and suddenly he saw the dreams of others. He saw a mother in the harbor town rocking her child beside a flickering candle. He saw fishermen sleeping, the salt drying on their hands. He saw an old woman who had lost her way long ago, smiling as she dreamed of her youth by the river. And in each dream there was a faint warmth spreading a hearth's glow that was not made of fire, but of serenity. It was the same warmth he now felt in his chest. He whispered, "So this is what the moon meant. The bread rises in the soul." He spent the day walking through the village, though the people didn't recognize him as they once had. He was no longer the minstrel who traded songs for coin. He moved like part of the breeze, his cloak trailing moonlight's memory. But as he passed each home, a faint scent of bread began to fill the air, and laughter stirred even in silence. At the weaver's shop, a woman paused her work and said to her child, "Do you smell that? Like fresh loaves from nowhere at all." At the harbor, sailors paused and looked toward the horizon, where the light seemed softer, gentler. And at the abbey atop the hill, a monk who had forgotten his faith knelt before the empty altar and whispered, "She's still watching, isn't she? The moon. She never left." The minstrel didn't need to speak. His steps became hymns, his silence became lullaby. Wherever he walked, people felt calmer, as if the earth itself exhaled a burden it had carried too long. By nightfall, he returned to his cottage, where the oven still glowed faintly. He placed what remained of the moonlit loaf beside the window, for any who might wander hungry through the dark. Then he sat in his chair and gazed at the horizon, where the first stars blinked awake. He plucked his lute once more, not for performance, but for companionship. Each note rose softly and drifted through the open window like the scent of peace. Outside, the world seemed to lean closer, listening. Then he noticed something. The sea below shimmered not silver now, but gold. The color of dawn had found its way into the moon's realm. He realized the balance had returned. The moon no longer mourned, the sun no longer chased. They had learned, through him, to share their light. He smiled faintly. "So it ends in warmth," he whispered, "as all things should." A voice, soft as a sigh, answered from nowhere and everywhere. "It ends where it began, in a song and in bread." The minstrel nodded, resting his head against the chair's worn wood. He felt the pulse of the sea, the hum of the stars, the heartbeat of the earth. His eyelids grew heavy, and he drifted not into sleep, but into something deeper. Some say he passed that night, his soul carried gently by the same tide that once brought him moonlight. Others say he still walks the misted shores, singing softly, unseen, leaving behind crumbs of warmth for the weary to find. But all agree on one thing. Sometimes when the moon is high and the tide breathes slow, a faint scent of baking bread lingers in the air, sweet, elusive, and kind. And if you listen carefully, you might just hear a lute playing the world's oldest lullaby. Night drifted slowly across the sky like a silken veil, settling over the village, the forest, the shore. The stars began their quiet watch, each one blinking like a patient heartbeat. Inside the cottage, where the minstrel's chair still rocked faintly, something shimmered on the table. The moon's pearl, once glowing softly in the alchemist's hand, now pulsed again with gentle light. As if awakened by his final song, it began to hum a rhythm that matched the sigh of the tide. From within its glow, sand began to form. Not ordinary sand, but grains that caught the starlight and held it, refusing to let go. They poured down in a delicate spiral, landing upon the table in a small circular mound, gold, silver, rose, and blue. And then from the air itself a shape began to appear. An hourglass. Its glass was thin as breath, its frame made of moonlit wood, and threads of seaweed turned to silver. The sand flowed without being turned, moving in a calm, endless cycle, rising and falling, falling and rising. It seemed alive, breathing, dreaming. As the sand moved, faint images appeared inside. A monk lighting a candle, a fisher tossing his net, a child tracing stars on a fogged window pane. Each image lingered a moment, then softened back into light. The hourglass whispered, not in words, but in feelings like memories woven from air. Time is not a current. It is a tide, it seemed to murmur. And dreams are its moon. A small breeze stirred through the cottage, bringing the scent of salt and baked bread. It caressed the empty chair, the quiet lute, the faint outline of the minstrel's cloak. And then, slowly, something began to take form there. Again, not flesh, not ghost, but the shimmer of presence. The minstrel's spirit had not vanished. It had become part of the rhythm. He looked upon the hourglass, calm and curious. "So you came for me, old friend," he said softly. "You waited all this while." The hourglass glowed brighter, as though nodding. Its sand began to slow until each grain hovered mid-air, suspended in golden stillness. In that stillness the minstrel heard every breath of the world, the turning of the tide, the whisper of moss in moonlight, the pulse of roots beneath soil. He understood. The alchemist's work had never been about transmuting metals or chasing eternal life. It was about preserving peace, the one true element that resists decay. The minstrel smiled faintly. "Then perhaps," he whispered, "we are all alchemists each time we sing." The hourglass answered with a soft chime, like two crystals kissing. Then it began to turn itself slowly, sand falling once again, but this time it fell upward. Each rising grain carried a memory, the alchemist's laughter, the moon's song, the warmth of the oven, the kindness of villagers. The more it rose, the lighter the room became, until it was no longer a cottage, but a sky filled with drifting constellations of sand. And through that sky walked the minstrel his steps, leaving faint trails of music. He crossed between stars like stepping stones, following the sound of the moon's breath. Far below, the world slept in peace. The villagers dreamed soft dreams. The abbey bell rang once at midnight, not as a call, but as a lullaby. The waves brushed the shore like silk. In that quiet, the hourglass floated above the sea, its glow reflected in every ripple. It had become something eternal, neither tool nor relic, but symbol. Each grain was a dream, falling, rising, never ending. From that night onward, travelers who wandered the coast sometimes found strange patterns in the sand at dawn circles and spirals that shimmered faintly before the tide washed them away. When asked, the old villagers would smile and whisper, "The minstrel's hourglass turned again last night." And always, in the soft hum of the sea breeze, there was music slow, wordless, soothing. They said if you fell asleep listening to it, you would dream not of what you feared, but of what you longed for. And so the legend spread, gentle as mist. The alchemist's hourglass had found its keeper, and the world itself had begun to breathe in rhythm with the moon once more. Somewhere above, in the endless quiet of the dreaming sky, the minstrel continued his walk among the stars, carrying no burden but a song. Each note he played loosened one more knot of sorrow from the earth below. and each grain of starlit sand that fell became another heartbeat of peace. The sky above the sea shimmered like a tapestry of breath and starlight. The minstrel walked among its folds, light-footed and unhurried, his cloak flowing like mist over still water. Every step he took stirred the cosmos gently, creating ripples of pale gold and muted blue. Below him, the world dreamed on. He could feel it, the pulse of sleeping hearts, the rhythmic rise and fall of distant tides, the hush of trees swaying in slow unison. He did not guide these dreams. He merely listened, as one listens to rain upon the roof or wind passing through ancient stone. And then, faintly at first, he heard another sound, a single chime, then another, like the slow toll of bells muffled by centuries. He followed the sound across the night until the stars began to gather, forming an archway of silver mist. Beyond it stood a cloister, a vast circular hall suspended in space, its pillars made of moonlight, and its floor a mirror of the sea below. Candles hovered in the air, each one flickering without flame, and between them walked quiet figures in pale robes, their faces serene and indistinct, as though carved from light. The minstrel stepped through the archway. At once, silence deepened, soft and sacred. The air tasted faintly of lavender and parchment. "Welcome," said a voice, neither male nor female, but gentle and clear as a bell's echo. "We have waited many turns of the hourglass." The minstrel bowed his head. "I am not certain I belong here," he said softly. "All who have carried the moon's gift belong," replied the voice. "You are among keepers now." The robed figures gathered around him, their movements slow and deliberate. One held an hourglass much like his own, its sand glowing with inner warmth. Another carried a feathered quill, its ink trailing silver motes through the air. A third held nothing but a single breath cupped between their palms, visible as a wisp of light. The minstrel understood without words. These were not mortals nor spirits bound to earth. They were echoes of all who had ever tended the flame of wonder, monks who painted constellations on chapel ceilings, healers who whispered prayers into herbs, poets who wrote by candlelight while the world slept. One of them stepped forward and said, "The hourglass is not a keeper of time, but of tenderness. Each grain that falls carries the weight of one moment of kindness given freely." The minstrel's gaze softened. "Then time itself," he whispered, "is measured in mercy," a gentle nod. "And you, minstrel, have filled your glass." They gestured toward the center of the cloister, where an enormous hourglass stood, 1,000 times the size of the others. Its sands glowed in shifting hues, like the surface of a living ocean. When the minstrel looked closer, he saw within it the dreams of all souls sleeping that night. A fisherman dreaming of his child's laughter, a maiden dreaming of the scent of lilacs, an old scholar dreaming of forgiveness. Each grain of light drifted down like a sigh, each one a heartbeat of the world below. The minstrel felt tears rise, but they were gentle tears, not of sorrow, but of release. "So this is the true alchemy," he murmured. "To turn time into tenderness?" The figure with the quill smiled faintly. "Yes, and to remind those who wake that the dream never leaves them. They led him to the great hourglass, and as he approached, its glow brightened. The air trembled softly, like the moment before a song begins. "Place your hand upon the glass," said the voice. "Let your song return to the stream." The minstrel obeyed. His fingers met the surface. It was cool as moon water, and immediately notes began to rise from within the hourglass. They swirled around him, weaving the melody he had carried all his life, now fuller, deeper, eternal. The sand within the glass shimmered, turning pale as dawnlight, and for the briefest moment the minstrel saw the face of the moon smiling above him. Then the melody faded into stillness. The cloister dimmed to soft silver hues. "Your song will remain," whispered the unseen voice. "Each time a weary soul drifts to sleep, it will hum beneath their breath, guiding them into calm." The minstrel bowed deeply, his heart weightless. "Then my journey is done." "Not done," said the voice. "Transformed." And with that, the light grew brighter once more, until it dissolved into thousands of tiny grains of sand, swirling like snow around him. The cloister faded, the bells fell silent, and the minstrel drifted once again, this time as one with the dreaming sky. When the minstrel opened his eyes again, there was no ceiling, no cloister, no sea beneath his feet, only the stillness of a boundless garden, bathed in the color of dawn that never quite arrived. The air itself glowed faintly, not with light, but with memory. He stood upon a path, woven of soft moss, cool beneath his bare feet. Around him stretched rows of lavender, rosemary, and pale bellflowers that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the wind. Beyond them rose apple trees heavy with dew, their branches bending as if in greeting. Each leaf shimmered faintly, reflecting the faces of those who dreamed below. This was no earthly garden. It was the place where time rested when it grew weary of moving. He took a slow breath, and it felt as though the scent itself was speaking to him, a whisper of incense, parchment, and bread still warm from a forgotten hearth. The same sense that had carried him through every step of his mortal life. He began to walk. The path wound gently, leading him past a quiet pond where silver fish drifted in the air above the surface rather than within it, their fins stirring small ripples of light. Each ripple bloomed into a sound, a sigh, a heartbeat, a lullaby. He realized the pond held the world's resting moments, all gathered together like pearls in water. The minstrel knelt by its edge and watched his reflection. For a moment he saw himself as he had been, the weary traveler, the singer beneath the moon, the man who traded songs for crumbs. Then, as ripples spread, that reflection changed. He saw the alchemist's face, the moon's face, the faces of all who had walked the path before him. The pond whispered, "Every soul is a grain in the same hourglass. Every breath a turn of its glass frame." He smiled faintly. "And yet the sand keeps falling." A voice answered him, not from the pond, not from the air, but from within his own chest. "Yes, minstrel, because stillness is movement unseen." He looked around and noticed a small figure tending the lavender rose. A woman in a simple gown, her hair veiled by soft silver threads. She was humming a sound as old as moonlight, as tender as dusk. "Do you tend this garden?" the minstrel asked gently. She looked up, and her eyes were the color of calm seas. "I do not tend it," she said. "It tends itself. I only remind it to remember." He tilted his head, intrigued. "Remember what?" "That everything blooms twice," she said, and plucked a blossom that glowed even after leaving its stem. "Once in life, and once in rest." She placed the blossom in his palm. It pulsed faintly, warm against his skin. "Yours is a second bloom, minstrel. Few reach this garden while their songs still echo below." He closed his hand gently around it. "Then this place is for echoes. It is for beginnings disguised as endings." The words carried through the garden, stirring petals into small spirals. Somewhere distant a bell chimed, not in warning or ceremony, but in kindness. As they walked together, the minstrel noticed that every plant in the garden seemed to carry a faint glow within its stem, like hourglass sand caught mid-fall. Even the shadows were soft, as though afraid to disturb the peace. The woman led him to a stone bench beneath an arch of white roses. Upon the bench lay a small wooden box, carved with stars and moons. "This," she said softly, "is the alchemist's first hourglass, the one he made before all others." The minstrel leaned closer. The box hummed with the same quiet resonance he felt when the moon first spoke to him. "Why is it here?" "Because even the makers must rest," she replied. He left it behind, knowing one day a voice would rise in song and complete his work. She looked at him with a serene smile. "That voice was yours." The minstrel lowered his gaze, humbled. "Then it was never mine at all," he whispered. "No song ever is," she said. "It belongs to silence. We are only its breath." The words settled into him like seeds, finding soft soil in his heart. He closed his eyes, feeling the hum of the box, the warmth of the flower in his hand, the rhythm of the garden breathing around him. When he opened them again, the woman was gone, but the roses had bloomed wider, and from the air came the faintest trace of laughter, like chimes caught on a breeze. The minstrel stood, still holding the blossom, and looked toward the horizon of the timeless garden. Beyond it shimmered a faint glow, an open gate made of light, pulsing with the rhythm of the world's sleep. He knew then that he had one more journey to take, not to leave this peace behind, but to carry it forward, to ensure that when mortals dream, they would dream with gentleness. He took one final breath of the garden's air. It filled him not with strength, but with stillness, a stillness so perfect it felt alive. And as he stepped toward the gate, the pond behind him reflected 1,000 constellations blooming from its surface, each one a dream set free. The minstrel's feet moved soundlessly upon the moss, each step echoing in the stillness like a slow heartbeat beneath the stars. Ahead of him, the luminous gate shimmered, not as metal or stone, but as liquid radiance shifting between gold and silver, sky and sea. It pulsed in harmony with the rhythm of his breathing, as though waiting for him to exhale before opening. He paused just before it, feeling a cool current of air flow through his hair and across his cheeks. It smelled faintly of the ocean of parchment, of all the places he had ever called home. In that moment, he felt the presence of everyone he had ever met, the alchemist, the abbey bells, the laughing children by the shore, even the gentle woman of the garden. Their essences shimmered like candlelight around him, forming a halo of memory and comfort. "You've come far," a soft voice said, though there was no one visible. It was the same voice that had whispered through the hourglass, the same tone that had lulled him through his earthly nights. "This gate does not end your path, minstrel. It widens it." He bowed his head. "And beyond it?" "Beyond," the voice murmured, "is the sound of all dreams breathing at once." The minstrel smiled faintly. "Then I must go gently." He raised his hand toward the gate, and at his touch the light rippled outward like water touched by wind. The surface softened, and from it rose quiet figures made of mist, their faces tender and calm. They were neither angels nor ghosts, but embodiments of remembrance, every peaceful thought ever shared, every forgiveness ever given. They formed an archway within the gate and began to hum not words, not melody, but pure resonance, the frequency of belonging. The air itself shimmered in response, and his heart, weightless and unbound, began to hum along. He took one step through the gate. Light surrounded him, warm and colorless. It was not blinding, but embracing like the glow behind closed eyelids on a sunny morning. Within it, he saw fragments of his life unfold in slow motion. His first lute, the dusty road to the abbey, the quiet nights when only the sea listened to his song. Then the images soft, becoming sensations rather than scenes, textures of emotion rather than moments of memory, gratitude, wonder, rest. The voice spoke again, nearer this time, as if whispered directly beside his ear. "Every note you sang was a turning of the glass, every breath a grain of mercy falling into place. And now?" The minstrel asked softly, though his words seemed to dissolve before leaving his lips. "Now you rest in the space between." He felt no fear, only an immense serenity, like floating in the center of a sigh. The sand of his life had fallen, and yet it had not ended. It had joined the great current, the eternal hourglass that turned with the dreaming of the world. He drifted deeper into the light. There was no sense of up or down, only the slow, rhythmic pulse of eternity. Around him flowed currents of quiet laughter, a breathless awe of the tiniest comforts that mortals never realize shape their days, a warm cup held in cold hands, a lantern flickering against the night, the hush of rain upon a roof. Every act of kindness was here, alive and luminous. He realized then that the alchemist's final wish had come true. The sands of the hourglass had indeed captured the breath of angels, but those angels were not distant beings in heaven. They were every gentle soul who had ever given warmth to another. And now the minstrel was among them. He felt his form lighten until it became indistinguishable from the glow around him. No body, no boundary, only awareness. He could feel the world turning, the seas shifting. the steady rhythm of countless sleepers breathing in unison. Then, somewhere far below, he heard it a child's voice, murmuring in sleep, "Sing me the story of the Moonlight Man." The minstrel smiled, unseen, and as the dream drifted toward him, he began to hum. The tune was soft and slow, made not of sound, but of shimmer, a vibration that wrapped itself around the child's dream like a blanket. The child stirred, smiled faintly, and slipped deeper into rest. For a while there was nothing else, just the ebb and flow of dream tides, and the minstrel's song woven through them. Time, if time still existed here, passed like breath. Eventually the light began to thin into soft gray, the way dawn thins the night. Shapes returned. Branches, clouds, the faint curve of the moon. The minstrel found himself standing once more in the threshold between worlds, the luminous gate now behind him, the vast sleeping earth before him. He could see the cottages below, the quiet abbey, the slow smoke rising from hearths. And there, upon the old table by the sea, the alchemist's hourglass gleamed faintly, waiting. The minstrel understood. His journey through life was not an ending, but a promise, to return whenever silence needed a voice, whenever someone sought sleep and could not find it. And so, as the first light of morning touched the sea, he lowered his gaze, lifted his hand, and let a single grain of radiant sand fall from his palm. It drifted down like a feather through air, landing within the hourglass. The sand shimmered once and began to fall, and somewhere in the waking world a weary soul smiled in their sleep, feeling for just a moment the warmth of a song they could not remember hearing. The hourglass had grown dim. Only a few grains of golden sand remained, shimmering faintly in the candlelight, like the last sighs of a dying star. Aurelius sat motionless, his wrinkled hands folded loosely in his lap, his breath a slow tide that rose and fell with the hush of the room. The air around him was heavy with warmth, the fragrance of melted wax, soft herbs, and the faint metallic sweetness of old glass. He could feel the room breathing with him. Each flicker of the candle was a heartbeat. Each creak of the wooden table was a thought, drifting through centuries of remembering. The alchemist closed his eyes and whispered a final invocation, not of power, but of peace. Let the sands fall as they may, for time is but the whisper of angels, and sleep is their eternal prayer. As the last grain fell, it did not strike the lower chamber with sound. Instead it vanished, absorbed by the silence itself. The air shimmered faintly, and the workshop seemed to exhale. Aurelius felt no fear, only an immense stillness. He had spent a lifetime chasing the boundaries of time, but tonight he had found something gentler, the space between each heartbeat, the hush between each falling grain. That he realized was where eternity lived. The candles bowed low. Their flames grew softer until they looked like stars reflected on a pond. His head tilted slightly to the side, and his eyes fluttered open, not toward the world of glass and wood, but toward something vast and unseen. A soft light spread across the floor, flowing like moonlight spilled from a cracked shell. The sand that had fallen through the hourglass began to rise again, upward in a golden spiral. It danced like the breath of angels indeed, shimmering as if alive, whispering through the air. Then, from within the golden swirl, a sound emerged. Not a word, but a hum. It was the same melody the alchemist had heard years ago, when he was but a student in the candlelit cloisters of the monastery, a song said to be the voice of time itself. It was beautiful. It was tender. It was infinite. The walls of the workshop began to dissolve into air. The wooden shelves became clouds of dust. The hourglass itself melted into light. And Aurelius, the dreamer, the maker, the listener, rose with it, his form soft and weightless, until he was no longer a man at all, but a whisper of sand, a whisper of time, a whisper of peace. The last candle went out. The room became a dream. And if one were to stand there long after the embers cooled and the night turned to dawn, one might still hear the faintest trace of that humming, not in the air but in the silence that followed. It was said by those who came after that when one held their breath and closed their eyes, they could still hear it, the sigh of an alchemist who had learned that the true measure of time was not in hours or years, but in stillness. But this is not where the story ends, for time and all its quiet cleverness does not end, it turns. And as the wheel turns, so too does the dream. Far from that ancient workshop, across a sea of centuries, a new pair of hands would one day find a small glass hourglass buried in the roots of an olive tree. Its glass would be cracked, its sand faintly golden, and when they lifted it to the light, the sands would shimmer and whisper just barely, like a breath that said, "Listen," for even in the deepest sleep, the breath of angels remains. And so, dear dreamer, as you rest tonight under the hush of your own breathing, imagine that soft candlelight once again. Imagine the scent of beeswax and crushed rosemary, the golden dust floating gently through the air. Feel the weight of the day melting away, one grain of sand at a time. Let the rhythm of your breath become the hourglass now, steady, soft, eternal. Inhale, and the upper chamber fills with new sands. Exhale, and they fall again, golden, calm, beautiful. Time no longer passes here. It simply breathes with you. And in this sacred stillness, perhaps, just perhaps, you can hear him, Aurelius, the old alchemist, whispering across the veil of dreams. You have nothing left to chase. You have only to rest, and in resting, to become infinite. The night outside folds around you like velvet. A gentle wind hums through unseen leaves. Somewhere a single candle still burns, perhaps in memory, perhaps in love. And as the golden sands of your own thoughts settle into silence, your mind becomes that same quiet workshop, timeless, safe, and glowing softly. Sleep, dear one. Sleep in the rhythm of falling sand. Sleep in the breath of angels. Sleep in the golden hush of the alchemist's hourglass, until the dawn finds you, peaceful, whole, and gently new. And now, dear dreamer, let the quiet remain with you. Don't rush to wake or stretch or rise, not yet. Just rest there, where the world is still hushed and golden. Feel how the air holds you like a soft blanket of warmth and calm. You are safe here. You are whole. Every breath that leaves your body carries away the remnants of thought, and every breath that enters brings a shimmer of light, the same light that once glowed through the alchemist's hourglass. The story lingers gently, like candle smoke in the air. It doesn't vanish. It simply becomes part of your dreaming. Perhaps you can still sense the scent of beeswax, the hush of parchment, the faint glimmer of dust floating in amber light. You might even hear that soft hum, the one that carried Aurelius beyond time, a sound that seems to rest right behind your heartbeat, steady, serene, and endless. That hum is within you now. It moves with your breath, it settles behind your eyes, it softens every thought and every corner of the day that came before. Tonight Dreamveil wandered through the alchemist's quiet world, a place where every sound is a lullaby, every candle a small sun, and every falling grain of sand a dream gently landing. Let yourself drift deeper into that rhythm. Each moment is slower now. Each heartbeat is softer. Each thought is farther away. You are becoming light, weightless, calm, still. You are the golden sand. You are the hush between each falling grain. And when the morning comes, when the light of dawn slips through your window like liquid pearl, you will not lose this peace. You will carry it with you, the calm of the workshop, the patience of the hourglass, the wisdom of silence. You will walk through your day like a dream still breathing, and the world will seem softer, more kind, more slow, more filled with wonder. Because you have remembered something tonight, that time is not a master to chase, but a song to rest within. So take one last, slow breath now. Inhale deeply. Let it fill you with the scent of warm earth and distant rain. And as you exhale, imagine releasing everything, every worry, every noise, every fragment of thought. Watch it all drift away like candle smoke rising toward the stars. The story fades, but the peace remains. It remains in your breath, in your pulse, in the quiet hush of this room. And as you drift now, perhaps into dream, perhaps into stillness, know that you are surrounded by gentle light, by the soft hum of golden time, by the endless calm of sleep. Good night, dear listener. Good night, golden dreamer. May your rest be deep, your heart be light, and your thoughts dissolve into the quiet rhythm of eternity. From Dreamveil Stories, thank you for closing your eyes and traveling with us tonight. Until next time, breathe softly, rest kindly, and let your dreams carry you, where the sands fall slow and the angels breathe between them.